speech relating to the theme of the day. Our speaker has always been a fan of Dolley Madison. Maybe it's because she is an activity director for seniors. She is always busy trying to entertain them and keep them engaged, just like Dolley. Please help me welcome our speaker, Arlinda Smith. Hello, Dolley Madison. Hello, Dolley Madison.
In July of 1849, the United States said a grateful goodbye to Dolley Madison with a funeral that was fit for a princess. President Zachary Taylor said, "She will never be forgotten because she was truly our first lady for a half a century." And that is the first time we ever used the term first lady. It was with Dolley Madison. Dolley was President Jefferson's hostess because he never remarried after his wife's death. And then she went on to be a hostess for her husband, James Madison, and was quite an influence over the years for the rest of us. And I will tell you today a little bit about Dolley's life before and after she married. This is just a glimpse of Dolley Madison today. Then go on to give you a few snapshots of Dolley Madison herself, and finally a tribute to Dolley Madison after her death. Though born in North Carolina, she grew up a Quaker on her family's plantation near Ashland, Virginia. As a Quaker, her father avoided the Revolutionary War and was totally against slavery. In fact, he let his own slaves go in 1783. Then he moved his family to Philadelphia, where he became bankrupt, causing his Quakers to disown him because he messed up his business. You can't do that if you're a Quaker. But Dolley, luckily, was already engaged to Todd Jr., a Quaker and an attorney, and the two were married. They had 2 children right away, within 3 years. Unfortunately, after they were married for 3 years, yellow fever swept through her town. Dolley lost her youngest son and her husband. And here she was, a widow at age 25 with 1 young son, probably about 2 years old. But Dolley was gregarious and kindly, and she had many, many admirers. One of them introduced her to James Madison. He had written George Washington's speeches, had a wide breadth of learning, and also had contributed largely to the Constitution, to the writing of the Constitution. But he was sickly and looked drawn, and just the opposite of Dolley. But two opposites attract, they say, and in 1794, they were married. Well, after the wedding, and there they are, Dolley Madison, James Madison, and the Quakers gave her the boot for marrying outside of her faith. Dolley took off her modest Quaker duds, as you can see, and she never looked back. Her wardrobe soon started matching her shining, outgoing personality, and she started buying expensive, extravagant gowns in silk and satin, which were scandalously cut for that day. Nothing made Dolley stand out like her turbans. She was rarely seen without one of her turbans, and her turbans often sported brightly colored feathers, sometimes a foot tall. You can imagine that. Dolley was also a devout user of snuff, often interrupting her socializing to pinch a little bit with her stained fingertips. She often carried a second hanky, and the second hanky was used to sop up the mess used by the snuff. Dolley, as a Quaker, was brought up despising slavery. Her father had freed his slaves, but her second husband, James Madison, was a prominent Virginia planter and slave owner. And on one occasion, at least one occasion, she seems to have forgotten her roots, because at a reception she threw to impress a British ambassador. She included stationing torch-holding African slaves to illuminate the house. One appalled guest called it a barbaric Egyptian display. Egyptian display. To have the black African slaves out there that way. Dolley was also in the house when the British invaded in 1814. They were coming to carry her away, parade her down the streets. She went to the roof and she watched the fireworks through a spyglass. Then she asked her servants to gather up some of her most important things, which included some gorgeous red curtains and that picture by Gilbert Stuart of George Washington. We've all seen it and admired. And she fled before the British got to the house. They had dinner she prepared for her guests before they burned the mansion down. So the way Dolley coped with this was to have the gorgeous red curtains made into a beautiful gown. And she wore that gown at functions that celebrated the victory over the British. In her twilight years, Dolley was a pauper. She sold part of the Madison papers to Congress for $30,000, which was a lot of money in those days. But her son, John Todd, had grown to be a drunkard, a quarrelsome, and a philandering fool. And he was a gambler to boot, which caused Madison to pay $40,000 of his money to cover his stepson's debts. Congress finally bought the rest of the papers in a trust fund for Dolley, only a year and a half before the poor woman died. Most people thought the world of Dolley, and her tributes are everywhere. There's a Dolley Madison baker, Dolley Madison on stamps, and Dolley Madison on coins. There's Dolley Madison's tribute on Route 20 in Orange, Virginia, at the turn lane into the Montpelier, where Dolley and James Madison lived. In closing, Dolley led a very colorful life, which was matched her personality and her dress, and she was loved by all. And she was given a funeral fit for a princess. We will always remember the first First Lady, Dolley Madison.